Harry was an early riser and had been for years. It wasn't by choice exactly, but before sunrise was the only time he had entirely to himself. Once his relatives woke up, he wouldn't have a moment's peace. Aunt Petunia would screech at him to make breakfast and clean the house and weed the garden. Uncle Vernon would berate him and glower at him over his morning coffee. And Dudley would manage to make every bad moment worse, just by existing. By nightfall, Harry would be too exhausted to do anything but curl up in his cupboard and go to sleep. But on days when Harry woke early enough, he'd have an hour or two to pretend he was the only person in the house, even if he still was stuck in the cupboard. And the cupboard wasn't so bad, really. Not when he couldn't hear Dudley watching his shows in the living room or Aunt Petunia gossiping loudly on the kitchen phone. When his relatives weren't around to drag him back to reality, it was easy to be an adventurer exploring a dangerous cave rather than a 9-year-old in a broom cupboard. Well, he wasn't 9 anymore, really. It was his 10th birthday today. Not that anyone cared. But Harry wasn't about to start wallowing in self-pity, because if he started, he rather suspected he'd never stop. Instead, he told himself defiantly that if having the Dursleys' affection meant he'd end up like Dudley, then he'd gladly be the freak under the stairs for the rest of his life. Harry wasn't really certain when he'd given up on the Dursleys. When he was very young, he'd thought he was just as bad as they said he was, and that if he could only be better, they'd finally love him. But Harry wasn't stupid or broken, and he figured out pretty quickly that his time was better spent hating the Dursleys than hating himself. His resolve growing steely strong, Harry looked up at a spider dangling from a strand of web not far from his nose and said, "I don't care what they think. I don't care that they don't care." His breath set the spider swaying, and Harry grinned a little to himself, relishing the peace and quiet. It wouldn't last, of course. Harry knew this year would be the same as every other. If the Dursleys even remembered it was his birthday, it'd only be to lament how he got stupider and clumsier every year. If he got a present, it'd only be an old sock or a bent hanger. But he told himself that this year, he'd say something. Throw the sock back in their faces or shove the hanger into the trash. Uncle Vernon would give him a sound thrashing and toss him back into his cupboard, but he'd have had his moment. He'd have shown them that if they didn't care about him, then he didn't care about them either. He told himself that this year he really didn't care. He smiled to himself again, but it was crooked, and it faded before it could reach his eyes. He told himself any number of grand things, yeah, but he didn't believe them for a second. The thing was, Harry wasn't sure he'd given up on the Dursleys at all. And maybe he really was a little bit stupid and a little bit broken. Because he already knew that he'd keep whatever trash they threw his way. Garbage was better than nothing at all.